I refused to send my son $600 for the first time in 44 years. At 5:03 on a Tuesday morning, my phone rang. Before I even looked at the screen, I already knew my son was about to ask me for $600. The frightening part wasn't that I knew. It was that I couldn't remember the last time I'd been wrong. Have I been helping my child, or have I been keeping them from learning how to stand without me? I didn't know that question had been waiting for me until that Tuesday morning. By the fourth ring, I answered. There was no point pretending I didn't know who was calling. Jason never called before sunrise unless something had gone wrong. He would apologize. He would explain. He would ask for $600, and I'd send it. Then I'd promise myself, just as I always had, that this would be the last time. Looking back, I sometimes wonder if I'd stopped being surprised long before that Tuesday. Maybe it began the first time I smiled at my son and said, "Don't worry, I'll take care of it." Those words had followed us for years. When I answered, Jason apologized for waking me. "I know it's early, Mom." I looked at the clock. "It's 5 in the morning." "I know. I'm sorry." He sounded genuinely ashamed. He always did. If I had to choose one word that had followed Jason through his entire life, it would be sorry. He whispered it after spilling milk across the kitchen table when he was 6. He said it again after his marriage fell apart. Years later, he whispered it beside his father's hospital bed, as though cancer had somehow been his fault. Confidence never stayed with Jason very long. Guilt always did. After a long silence, he finally told me why he'd called. He needed $600. I didn't ask whether he was sure. I asked what had happened. His landlord. He'd worked overtime and honestly believed it would be enough. It wasn't. Then came the sentence I'd heard so many times it no longer sounded new. "Mom, I don't have anyone else." Without thinking, I looked toward the empty side of the bed. Tom had been gone for 12 years, but some mornings I still expected him to answer before I did. He used to tell Jason, "People don't run out of options as often as they think. Most of the time, they run out of confidence." At the time, I thought Tom was talking about our son. Years later, I began to wonder if he'd been talking about me. I told Jason I'd send the money. He thanked me, and neither of us sounded surprised. I unlocked my phone, opened the banking app, selected Jason's name, and entered $600. For a second, I realized I hadn't even checked my own balance first. Then I pressed send. 30 seconds. That was all it took to solve another emergency and quietly postpone another lesson. Helping Jason hadn't always been this automatic. There had been a time when I asked questions, when we talked things through, when I wondered whether I was doing the right thing. Somewhere over the years, those conversations disappeared. Sending money became as ordinary as locking the front door before bed. My hands knew the routine long before my heart had the chance to question it. I thought the morning was over. It wasn't. A moment later, Jason texted to say the transfer had arrived and he'd call the landlord as soon as the office opened. Then almost as an afterthought, "Love you, Mom." "Love you too." The conversation ended, but I kept holding the phone against my ear. Only afterward did something begin bothering me. Jason hadn't asked why I was awake. He hadn't asked whether I'd been sleeping. Maybe he simply assumed mothers were always there. Perhaps that shouldn't have mattered. But somehow, it did. I didn't know it then, but that tiny disappointment would stay with me much longer than the $600 ever would. I never went back to bed. The coffee maker rattled to life while morning light slowly crept across the kitchen floor. Outside, Mr. Henderson chased his newspaper halfway down the sidewalk. The garbage truck stopped in front of the Wilsons' house exactly where it always stopped every Tuesday. Everything outside looked perfectly ordinary. Inside, something had shifted. It wasn't the money. Money wasn't what stayed with me. What stayed with me was another realization. I couldn't remember the first time Jason had called because he needed rescuing. There had to have been a first. The first emergency. The first transfer. the first time I'd said, "Don't worry, I'll take care of it." Somewhere over the years, those moments had blended together until they felt like one endless conversation repeating itself. For days later, Jason came for Sunday dinner carrying an apple pie with a bright yellow clearance sticker still attached to the box. I pretended not to notice. Halfway through dinner, I asked about his truck. "It's getting me around." The answer came a little too quickly. His phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen and slipped it back into his pocket. "Just work." I nodded, and neither of us mentioned the truck again. That afternoon, I opened the faded blue notebook I kept in the kitchen drawer. No one knew it existed, not because I'd hidden it, but because no one had ever asked. Each page held only a single word: shoes, insurance, truck, electric bill, rent. The ink had faded, but the habit hadn't. The oldest entry simply read, "Shoes, Jason was 13. His baseball cleats split open 2 days before opening day. Tom wanted him to save for another pair, but instead, I bought new ones that afternoon." As I turned the pages, the handwriting never changed, mine. My fingers stopped beside the newest entry, rent. I rested my hand on the page, and for a long moment, I didn't move. Then one quiet question finally found me. How many problems had Jason actually solved himself? And how many had simply disappeared because I'd always reached them first? I closed the notebook, a little harder than I intended. That night, I couldn't sleep. Around midnight, I wandered into the kitchen for a glass of water. The phone was exactly where I'd left it. For years, late-night calls had terrified me because they usually meant tragedy. Standing there in the quiet house, I realized something had changed. I wasn't afraid of the phone ringing anymore. I was afraid of what the next call might ask me to do. I rested my hand beside the phone, not on it, just beside it. The screen stayed dark, and so did the house. I stood there for a long time before one final question settled quietly into my heart. Had I mistaken always being available for preparing my son to live without me? 3 days later, the phone rang again. The next 4 days were unusually quiet. Every time my phone lit up, I reached for it. A reminder, a weather alert, church, never Jason, relief, then guilt. Deep down, I already knew what I would do if he called again. Or at least, I hoped I did. Jason came over that Sunday carrying a paper bag of dinner rolls. They were on sale. We talked about nothing important until I asked about his truck. "It's getting me around." The answer came too quickly. Just then, a tow truck rolled past the front window. Jason watched it disappear, then quietly changed the subject. I let him. 2 evenings later, my phone rang. The woman introduced herself from Miller's Auto Repair. Before she'd finished her first sentence, my mind had already gone where every parent's mind goes first: hospitals, ambulances, bad news delivered gently. Instead, she told me Jason was fine, only his truck wasn't. The repair would cost $600. Exactly $600. For a moment, I almost laughed, not because anything was funny, but because life had somehow chosen the exact same number. She explained they would hold the truck for 48 hours. After that, storage fees would begin adding up every day. "If it sits too long," she said gently, "repairing it may no longer make financial sense." 48 hours, it sounded like plenty of time. Tuesday came, and Jason didn't call. Wednesday morning, still nothing. For the first time in years, he seemed determined to solve the problem himself. I should have felt proud, but instead, the silence grew heavier with every passing hour. That evening, I wandered into the garage. Tom's toolbox still rested beneath the workbench, a thin layer of dust covering the lid. When I brushed it away, another memory surfaced, almost untouched. Jason was 16 and the truck wouldn't start. He begged Tom to fix it before Monday morning. Tom reached for a wrench. Jason smiled with relief. Then Tom placed it in Jason's hands instead. "I don't know what I'm doing." "I know." Tom smiled. "That's exactly why you're the one holding it." At the time, I thought Tom was being stubborn. Standing there all those years later, I wondered if he'd simply understood something. I hadn't. Jason called the following Wednesday at 8:17 that evening. His voice sounded tired, not sleepy, defeated. The garage wouldn't release the truck until the bill was paid. $600. Without thinking, I unlocked my phone, entered my passcode, opened the banking app, selected Jason's name, and typed $600. My thumb hovered over. Send. One touch. 30 seconds. That was all it would take. For one impossible moment, I wanted two different futures. One where my son had his truck back, and another where he finally believed he could stand without me. I couldn't have both. My thumb drifted away from the screen, and I lowered the phone. Neither of us spoke. Finally, I asked, "What are you going to do?" The silence stretched so long I wondered whether the call had dropped. "I don't know." His voice sounded smaller than I'd ever heard it. "I thought you'd help." "I can't. Not this time." Silence. Long enough that I wondered if he was still there. When Jason finally answered, his voice had gone very quiet. "Okay, I guess. I'll figure something out." "Jason." I wasn't even sure what I wanted to say. He spoke first. "Good night, Mom." The line went dead. I stayed there with the phone pressed against my ear, listening as though he might come back. He didn't. For a long time, I stood alone in the kitchen. The banking app was still open, and Jason's name was still there. $600. One touch, and no one would ever know. Not Jason. Not anyone. Only me. I stared at the screen for another minute. Then I locked the phone, carried it into the living room, set it face down on the coffee table, and walked away. For 44 years, I had answered every one of my son's calls the same way. That night, for the first time, I didn't. The house was quiet, almost exactly as it had been at 5:03. Only this time, the silence meant something different. I didn't call Jason. Not that night. Not the next morning. Not the week after. Every morning began the same way. Before I was fully awake, my hand reached for my phone. His name still sat near the top of my screen. One morning, I even typed a message. "Are you okay?" I stared at it for a long time. Then I deleted it. Doing nothing turned out to be much harder than sending $600 had ever been. Life slowly rearranged itself, not through dramatic moments, but through ordinary ones. I stopped buying the coffee Jason liked because no one ever drank it. I stopped making enough lasagna for leftovers. Whenever I heard a truck slow outside the house, I still looked toward the window before remembering there was no reason to. The habits faded, but hope didn't. It simply learned how to whisper. One afternoon, while cleaning the refrigerator, I found a plastic container pushed all the way to the back with blue painter's tape stretched across the lid. Jason. Inside was lasagna. I'd made it the Monday after our phone call because I was certain he'd stop by. Then I thought Tuesday, then Friday, then the weekend. Nearly a month had passed. I stood there holding the container longer than I should have. Then I threw it away. The trash can closed with a dull thud. I stood there for another moment, staring at the empty shelf. The house grew quiet in a way I had never noticed before. Some evenings I caught myself listening for footsteps that never came. Some mornings I looked at my phone, almost disappointed to find no missed calls. Nearly 4 weeks after our last phone call, someone knocked softly on my front door. 3 slow knocks. Not the doorbell. Jason. I knew before I opened it. His jacket smelled faintly of engine oil. There were fresh cuts across both hands, and dark circles rested beneath his eyes. He looked exhausted, but there was something different about him. Not happier or stronger, just steadier. His truck wasn't outside as he stepped into the house. A city bus pulled away from the corner. We drank coffee and talked about baseball, the weather, Mrs. Wilson's flowers, everything except the reason he'd come. Families have a way of dancing around the conversations they most need to have. Eventually, I noticed the cuts across his knuckles. What happened? Jason smiled. The mechanic told me to leave. I waited, so I came back the next day. I swept the parking lot anyway. He never asked me to. He just never told me to stop. Eventually, he handed me a broom. Later, a wrench. He smiled. I almost quit. Twice. But somehow, I kept showing up. He looked down at the cuts across his hands. One day, he handed me something to fix. That's when I realized I actually knew what to do. For a moment, neither of us said anything. Then I smiled. The first time someone handed your father a wrench, he said almost the same thing. Jason laughed. So it runs in the family. It does. As he finished his coffee, I finally asked, "Were you angry?" For a while. At me? He thought about it, mostly at myself. A quiet smile crossed his face. I kept checking my bank account every morning. I already knew it would still be empty, but I looked anyway. He looked out the window. One morning, I stopped checking. I picked up the broom instead. For the first time in weeks, silence no longer felt empty. Before leaving, Jason reached into his pocket and placed a brass key on the kitchen table. His spare key. "You forgot this." He smiled. "No, I don't think I'll need it anymore." I slid it back toward him. "You'll always have one." "I know." He picked it up, turned it over once, then slipped it back into his pocket. "I hope you're right." I stood at the front window and watched him walk toward the bus stop. There was something different about the way he moved. Nothing dramatic. No miracle. Just quiet confidence. The bus arrived, and he climbed aboard. I watched until it disappeared around the corner. For the first time in years, I didn't wonder how he would get home. The following Tuesday, I woke a few minutes before dawn. Old habits stay with us. At 5:03, my phone lit up. For one brief second, my heart forgot everything it had learned. I reached for it. It wasn't a call, just a text. "Morning, Mom. Truck's running." Took me 3 days to figure it out. Dad would have laughed. "Love you." I read it once. Then again. Outside, the first birds had started singing. I set the phone beside my coffee. Tom had been right. People don't run out of options as often as they think. Most of the time, they run out of confidence. Morning light spilled across the kitchen table. It was just another Tuesday.